Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Thousands of people filled the streets of downtown Edmonton to rally around the issue of climate change. Security was tight for the event as the crowd walked from Jasper Avenue to the Alberta Legislature, where they heard from 16-year-old Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg. The crowd's calls for climate action drowned out the oil industry supporters who held a counter-protest. Thunberg asked leaders to work together to solve the climate crisis, which many say is the most pressing issue facing humanity.
The oil and gas industry is affecting everything that affects the animals, the humans, even the sea creatures. So we're living in dangerous times, and we're here to support the next generation.
Cape Breton has been a Liberal stronghold for almost 20 years. In this election, the Liberal candidate is a well-known Mi'kmaq rights advocate and the only Indigenous candidate in the Sydney-Victoria riding. But could recent revelations of a troubling past comments throw a wrench into Jaime Baptiste's bid for a seat in Parliament? Angel Moore finds out.
Sydney, Victoria is on the northern part of Cape Breton Island here in Nova Scotia. It's home to two of the province's larger First Nations, Eskizoni and Membertou, where APTN spoke with residents and candidates. Baptiste lives in Eskizoni. He has a law degree, served on the National Youth Council of the Assembly of First Nations, was named a National Aboriginal Role Model in 2005, and is involved in treaty education in Nova Scotia.
And I think having a diverse perspective helps. And I think that the more diverse perspectives we have in Canada, as our Prime Minister has always said, diversity is strength in this country.
But earlier this month, the 40-year-old made headlines when the Toronto Star exposed his sexist and homophobic social media post dating back to 2012. One likened men's tennis to gay porn, and another, Baptiste said, cleaning, folding, cooking, feeling like an epic fail, but I haven't found a woman who can stand me long enough to do this for me. He has apologized, and the Liberals are keeping him on the ballot.
You need to overcome these things in your life, and you need to own up to them and say you can do better, and that I plan to do better, and that if the voters see fit to put me in as a candidate, that I will do better.
Community members who have collaborated with Baptiste in the past support him.
One of the core values of the Mi'kmaq people has always been our ability to forgive, and to understand that people grow and change throughout their entire lives from the moment they are born until the moment that they die.
That I forgive Jaime for those words, and I think a lot of women will, because that's not the kind of man that he is, and I think he was at a vulnerable state during that time in his life.
But one candidate says Baptiste may have to live with the consequences.
He wasn't a child. He made those comments. He's the one that's going to have to answer them, not me.
Locals see the election as an opportunity to have pressing issues addressed, like rights and the economy.
We need water, we need our fishing rights, we need our children and their education, and most of all, it's what we're going to bring for our children.
Include First Nations people in the Canadian economy on a day-to-day basis, and not as outliers, but as part of the Canadian fabric.
Conservative candidate Eddie Orrell served in provincial politics for 8 years. A physiotherapist of 25 years, he says the Tories will improve health care.
As a federal elected member, we can bring more to the table. We can make sure that the healthcare transfers remain the same or are increased.
NDP candidate Jody McDavid is an educator and business owner who says her party will turn promises into action.
So we've made a lot of commitments to do things like honor the UNDRIP principles, to look at truth and reconciliation, and not just look at what those items are, but to do an action plan.
Lois Foster is running for the Greens. She has worked in healthcare for over 30 years and has seen patients who could not afford medication.
Our plan as the Green Party to have a universal healthcare program, a pharmacare program, would benefit all people of all ages.
Voters will decide if they forgive Baptiste and who will best represent those in the Unama'ki district of Mi'kmaq. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Membertou First Nation.
The Thunder Bay Superior North riding is one of 3 constituencies between the Manitoba border and Thunder Bay. The NDP's Indigenous candidate is taking on a Liberal cabinet minister in a region where both have strong community roots. Here's Willow Fiddler with a look inside the riding.
This riding is home to over 80,000 residents. It stretches from the northern part of Thunder Bay east across Lake Superior to White River and northward to the Albany River. Former Anishinaabe Aski Nation Deputy Grand Chief Anna Betty Achni-Peneshkam is the lone Indigenous candidate here. She's running for the NDP.
I had the privilege of working and navigating through the provincial and federal government and bureaucracy, and you know, it was a learning experience. I believe that it provides me with the skills and the knowledge to ensure that I can navigate through those processes.
She's up against Liberal incumbent Patty Haidu.
But I also saw the gaps, you know, because some of the legislations that are and policies that exist pretty well do not accommodate to the North, and that needs to change.
Haidu, a community advocate on issues like homelessness, was first elected in 2015. She served as Minister for the Status of Women, then took over the Employment, Workforce and Labour portfolio.
And I've learned a tremendous amount over the past 4 years about how to use the advocacy skills I developed in the community at the table, at the cabinet table with my colleagues and members of parliament, and within my own departments to make sure that the work that I've done has truly reflected the needs of everyday citizens and people that often are vulnerable or marginalized.
Thunder Bay is diverse and a major service hub for rural and remote communities.
I definitely say that, you know, climate change is a really important issue to me, as well as, you know, generally Indigenous issues.
I'm really upset about the racism in Canada, particularly towards Indigenous people. Well, at least that's the experience we have of it in Thunder Bay.
But we also need to look at the urban Indigenous explosion here in the city with how young our people are, how vulnerable they have become, and the high rate of homelessness in the city. We have a really extremely high rate.
Bruce Heyer is the Green Party candidate. He was the elected member of parliament for this riding in 2008 and 2011 when he was with the NDP.
I think our platform is about making Canada and Northwestern Ontario a cleaner and greener and safer and more sustainable place, a fairer place, and more prosperous all at the same time.
The latest 338 Canada projection polls shows Haidu leading the popular vote with 34%. Achni-Peneshkam and Heyer are virtually tied at 23% and 22% respectively. Conservative candidate Frank Pouliot has 17% support.
With now the Trudeau Liberals scandals and what we hear at the door, a lot of people are turning away. They're looking for viable options.
Heyer says if he's not elected MP, he hopes constituents choose Achni-Peneshkam.
She's a strong woman. She's a carer and a doer. And it's time for us. We've never, I don't think we've even had a candidate that was Indigenous here before. And it would be great to have an MP that's Indigenous.
Yusuf Kanjari is the People's Party of Canada candidate. He says people can't rely on inefficient bureaucracies anymore.
Your water bill, electric, phone, house insurance, gas, all these things have stayed the same in terms of quality, but have steadily risen over the last years and have become simply unmanageable for many Canadians.
With the election just days away and uncertainty as high as ever, this voter is worried.
Now again, we find ourselves in a campaign where, in an election campaign, where we're frightened of a Conservative majority and what that means for the future of the party, and it's a real possibility because we don't have proportional representation.
Willow Fiddler, APTN National News, Thunder Bay.
We, of course, want to hear what you think. Here's how you can continue the conversation. You can send your emails to news@aptn.ca. Find us online at aptnnews.ca and on youtube.com/APTN News. You can also follow APTN News on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for more Indigenous news. We've got more coming up from the election trail after the break, but first, here is your weather forecast for tomorrow. To the east coast, we've got 12 in rain in St. John's, 11 in sunshine in Halifax, 4 and snow in Nain, Cartwright, 12 and rainy. Lots of sunshine in Quebec. Chibougamau 5 degrees, 12 in Montreal. London and Sarnia 16 and mostly sunny, 13 and rain in Sault Ste. Marie. Big Trout Lake will be rainy and 6 degrees, 13 and rain in Thunder Bay. 7s for Puckatawagan and Thompson and rain and Norway House. 10 and a mix of sun and cloud in Winnipeg and Brandon and Dauphin. 14s for Estevan and Regina and Saskatoon, mostly sunny. 10 mix of sun and cloud in Buffalo Narrows. 9 and mix of sun and cloud up in Stony Rapids. Welcome back. 5 candidates are running in the Kenora riding in northwestern Ontario. APTN's Jolene Banning was there to see what people in the region want from their next member of parliament and to meet some familiar faces and some of those running.
The Kenora riding is one of the largest by landmass and smallest by population. It covers the vast majority of Ontario and reaches as far west as the Manitoba border. From the northwest corner of Thunder Bay, it includes remote northern First Nations. Throwing her hat into the ring for the Green Party is candidate Kirsty Ralco.
Here in urban Kenora particularly, people are really concerned about what we're seeing with addictions downtown. Part and parcel to that is homelessness that comes along with it.
Kirsty Ralco was born and raised in Thunder Bay but has called Kenora home for the last 4 years. She currently sits on City Council and is hoping to unseat Liberal incumbent and former Indian Affairs Minister Bob Nault, who was not available for an interview despite numerous requests. The NDP candidate is Rudy Turtle, chief of Grassy Narrows First Nation.
The Kenora area, it's like housing, infrastructure, and dealing with the homelessness. It's a real big thing in our area.
If elected, he has plans to address those concerns.
To make our voice heard more than it is now, and to really push the issues in our riding to the forefront.
Many Grassy Narrows residents suffer from mercury poisoning. A treatment care facility was promised by the Liberal government, but Grassy Narrows rejected the offer, saying the proposal put forward wasn't good enough. Kenora resident Mitchell Purnett has been following the candidates but is still undecided on who to vote for.
For millennials like myself to be able to thrive in the economy is a huge issue.
The Conservatives promised to promote jobs in rural and northern communities. Their candidate, Eric Milo, was not available for an interview. Housing, addictions, and clean drinking water are also on the minds of voters like Michael King.
We had a boil advisory last night, so we all got to experience what that's like, and it was a nightmare. It sucks. So I'd love to see someone addressing that.
Barbara Papasay-Skeed looks at the past party records before casting her ballot.
What have they done to bring prosperity for the small communities and the reserves, the communities like my reserve?
She's from Grassy Narrows First Nation and studying in Kenora.
My reserve has mercury, and the drinking water is, we have to use bottled water all the time, and it's been like that all this time. It still hasn't changed all these years.
Voters will decide who represents them in Parliament when they hit the polls on Monday. Jolene Banning, APTN National News, Kenora.
Tucked away in the southeast corner of Winnipeg is the St. Boniface-St. Vital riding. It's home to a rich Francophone culture and Indigenous history. For the first time in its history, 4 Métis candidates are running. Brittany Hobson takes us there.
The St. Boniface-St. Vital riding has the largest Franco-Manitoban population in the city. It's also home to the grave of Métis leader Louis Riel. And for what may be the first time in the riding's history, 4 Métis candidates are hoping to secure the seat. Incumbent Dan Vandel is running for the Liberals.
We started the first ever Liberal Indigenous caucus, and that is still going strong at the dissolution of Parliament in June of this year, and you know, the Prime Minister has often said that there's no relationship more important, and I believe him.
Prior to entering federal politics, Vandel was a Winnipeg City Councillor for nearly 2 decades. He was one of the record number of Indigenous candidates to get into the House of Commons 4 years ago.
I'm currently Parliamentary Secretary to Indigenous Services. I work closely with Seamus O'Regan, and I've really enjoyed the last couple of years working in Indigenous Services, and I'd be honored to keep doing that work in whatever capacity the Prime Minister would want me to.
The riding has been historically Liberal, with the Tories only being elected 4 times in the past 94 years. NDP candidate Billy Cross says it's time St. Boniface, St. Vital goes orange. She says life's gotten more expensive under the Liberals.
Life hasn't gotten any easier, it's gotten harder, and if it's affecting me, and I'm a school teacher, I make a very good living, what's happening to people who don't have that type of employment?
Healthcare concerns, among other things, are top of mind for some residents.
And since we don't have enough beds and our hospital's always so full, it just makes everyone here stressed, because we want to take care of people.
Address the climate crisis and probably more resources for people who are suffering with addiction.
Green candidate Ben Linick has seen the toll cuts to healthcare have had on residents. He's an emergency operator and dispatcher with the Fire Paramedic Service.
There's not enough being done for people who fall on hard times, for people who do fall through the cracks, for people who are marginalized by the systems we already have in place. And so we really need to take a look at what's going on and why this is happening and look at a lot of the root causes.
While the province is in charge of healthcare, all 3 candidates have said they will do their best to work with Manitoba. Also running is Regine Caron for the Conservatives, but she declined to speak with APTN. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Nunavut is Canada's largest geographic federal riding, spanning 3 time zones and covering 1/5 of Canada. It's also the 2nd smallest riding by population. Our Kent Driscoll has the story of one of Canada's most unique ridings and the 3 Inuit women vying to represent it in Ottawa.
Nunavut's population is just over 30,000 people, but the riding covers 25 different communities and over 2 million square kilometers. More than 95% of Nunavut's funding comes from the federal government, a fact voters have to keep in mind. The riding is wide open, and Nunavut voters have a choice they've never had before. 3 Inuit women running for the 3 largest federal parties. A familiar face in place for the Conservatives, Leona Aglukkaq. Aglukkaq was a 2-term MP and a cabinet minister under the Stephen Harper Conservatives. She's citing the Conservative record of building infrastructure in the north as one of the reasons to pick blue, and couldn't resist a shot at the Prime Minister, who sent 7 cabinet ministers and himself to Nunavut in the months before the election.
Nunavut issues matter every single day and not a month before an election is made. Announcements are made on old money, and announcements are being made on money that's going to be spent in 2024. That is not fair to Nunavut Mute.
Also in fairness to Nunavut Mute, Aglukkaq did re-announce her share of old money while she was in cabinet. For the Liberals, Megan Pizzo-Lyle. She's from the western part of Nunavut. The Prime Minister showed up in Nunavut to support her twice now, once when she announced and another time during the campaign. The Liberal record and platform are major parts of her message.
I am asking you to vote for me based on my experience, my vision, but most importantly because we have a real plan to implement the things we promise.
For the NDP, 25-year-old Mumilaq Kakak. She's originally from Baker Lake but now calls Iqaluit home. Nunavut has never elected an NDP member federally. She's carrying the banner of change.
We often hear that these issues are not simple, but I can confidently say the solutions are very simple, so there is no reason that these issues cannot be taken care of.
Polling doesn't really work in Nunavut. Each community is different. Each has their own issues. But history shows that this election will most likely be close. But there's one hard fact no one can deny. The next MP for Nunavut will be an Inuk woman. We'll find out which one on Monday. Kent Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
We need to take a quick break, but when we come back, APTN Investigates takes a deep dive into the never-ending housing crisis. Stay with us. To northern Alberta, we've got 8 mix of sun, cloud, and Fort Chip 5 in snow and high level. 12 in sunshine for Edmonton and Lethbridge, 11 for Red Deer and Calgary. 12 in mixed sun and clouds in Kamloops, 8 in sunshiny in Quesnel. 9 with rain in Smithers and Prince Rupert, 3 and some snow in Fort Nelson. 0 with a mix of sun and cloud in Beaver Creek, 3 and rain or snow in Mayo. Wauhee and Wrigley are both 0 with some precipitation there. -3 for Paulatuk, Tuk, and in Nuvik, and lots of sun though. 1 in snow in Baker Lake, snow, and -2 in Repulse Bay. Arctic Bay will be snowy and 6 degrees, 3 in some sunshine in Clyde River, 2 with a mix of sun and clouds in Cape Dorset. Welcome back. The housing situation in Canada's Inuit communities is at least as desperate as it is on reserves in the south. Inuit housing is the focus of part 2 of Healing Housing, which airs tonight on APTN Investigates. Reporter Christopher Reed joins us now to talk about the second part of his 2-part series. You went to Manitoba and BC for the housing story. We're gone up north to Nunavut. What can you tell us about the housing crunch up in Nunavut?
Well, we spoke with Nunavut's housing minister, Patrick Netzer, and he says bluntly, you know, we need help. We're getting further and further behind every year. He says up in Nunavut they need about 3,300 new housing units, and that's going to cost about $1 billion, but it looks like he's probably going to have to be satisfied with about $275 million over the next 9 years.
And who do we meet up there?
We meet a person named Josh Alahat. That's one of the people we meet. He lives in Hall Beach, Nunavut, which is in the Arctic Circle. He lives in a home provided with funding by the Nunavut Housing Corporation, which is run by the territory. And he has a lot of problems. He's got mold in the house. His kids are getting, he's got 4 kids are getting rashes from the mold. He has a crack in the floor, a big crack that lets in cold air. Alahat tells us he's complained a number of times to the local housing authority, but they just don't have time to deal with it. So one of the things Alahat and his 4 kids and his spouse do regularly is they actually head out onto the land. They take this big elk skin with them, wrap themselves up, and they camp on the land just to get out of the smell of mold in their house.
Unbelievable. What did you find most surprising about the housing situation, which is unique in Nunavut?
Well, we meet a fellow named Kamerik Inuktakau, who is a local housing activist in Iqaluit, and Q, as he's known locally, shows us the homelessness problem in the capital. And, you know, so we see elders who are apparently surviving, living under abandoned fishing boats right on Frobisher Bay, right on the beach there. And, you know, homelessness down south is one thing, but when you're up there, it's a whole different ball game, I would imagine.
Unreal. Well, thanks for taking the time to come in here and tell us about it. We can't wait to watch part 2.
Thank you.
Thank you. Healing Housing airs right now, and that's all the news that I have for you tonight. If you need to get informed before voting on Monday, check out our website, aptnnews.ca. Click the hashtag Vote2019 link. I'm Melissa Ridgen, and I'll see you back here tomorrow. Stay tuned now for APTN Investigates.